Welcome to Know What I Mean. My name's George.
My name's Oscar. This week you picked a quote, George. I think, well, we talked a lot about gratitude and we talked about what we take for granted. And again, it's just a great reminder. Even as I'm looking around now, I'm seeing opportunities to be grateful and to see things more clearly and to not take things so much for granted. So it's always a joy when an episode encourages that sort of positive shift in mindset. Yeah, I really enjoy that.
You know, that can be just so valuable. It's something to easily discount because it's something that's free and you can do at any time. But it is incredibly valuable to switch your mindset like that sometimes. And yeah, the thing especially that you were saying about your food and like all of the different people that are involved in that getting to your plate, you know, because I've done it before of being mindful of the eating process and appreciating that. But then thinking about all the work and all the people who've like, I don't know, come up with ideas for recipes and, you know, that. Yeah, I thought that was a really cool thing that I got from the episode.
Were you trying to plug your new project there, George?
I wasn't trying to plug
recipes.
No, I wasn't trying to say how important food YouTubers are.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But you will leave.
But I can leave it. I can leave the description to my channel. I can leave the link to the channel in the description if you like. Seeing as it's your idea.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, enjoy the episode.
The quote for this week is, "What is easiest to see is often overlooked." And this is a quote from Milton H. Erickson, who is a psychotherapist and innovated in hypnotherapy a lot. I guess he was kind of just a genius, someone who really just completely transformed how hypnosis was understood, and so many of the changes that he made have, you know, now have a big impact on how things are done. So this quote, you can kind of look at it in a few different ways, but the first thing that it made me think of was just how we have a tendency to take blessings for granted and our environment in general. Imagine you're looking out your window and it's like a really grey, rainy day, just really crappy weather. You're like, shit, this sucks. Like I had plans, I had things I wanted to do, whatever. But if you think about that situation, what is the thing that is most easy to see in that situation? The thing that is most easy to see is the window, because that's what you're looking out of. You're looking out of a window at this rainy day, and all you're seeing is the rainy day when you're on the warm and dry side of the window. And that's such a great thing to have. So I just thought that really illustrated that feeling of you just focusing on something and you're looking directly through the window at this rain and thinking about how much it sucks and forgetting that you're in a nice dry house and you're warm and you've got that shelter. There's just so many things in our lives that we can get used to, and just that they become what we expect and so quickly can just be dismissed as like, yeah, obviously, of course I've got a roof over my head, but anyway, I've got things that I need to sort out, or I wanted to do this and now it's raining.
And when you were reflecting on gratitude or what you take for granted in your life during that process, so I'm just curious about what were the main things that you thought for yourself that kind of came out from that?
There was one thing that really hit me actually the other week when I was listening to a podcast, and there's a guy on it who is Indian, but he lives in America. And he was saying, you know, I don't want to diminish the poverty and, you know, the bad things that happen in the US, but the type of poverty that you can see in somewhere like India is just on a different level. It's a different type of poverty. Because if you are somewhere like America or the UK, there are safety nets from the government, and there's also the idea of social mobility. You know, you feel like you can, through hard work and perseverance and some luck, you can make things better. It's not guaranteed, but you can at least see that there is a possibility for progress in that way. However, some places in say India, there is just not even a glimmer of hope. There are levels of poverty where there's no conceivable out. There's no like, oh, actually, if I just work hard and I get my shit together and I get a good education, or I, come up with a great business idea and I work hard on it, that's not even an option or a thought that you could even entertain. People at that level can just be in poverty for generations and generations and generations without any light or any possibility of becoming more wealthy. And just hearing it really put like that hit me, because I realized just, how much you can take for granted being in a country like this, that even at the very bottom of the pile in the UK, if you're the most, in a really awful situation, there is at least more potential and more possibility for things to improve. And that is such a blessing.
I mean, I could only reflect on that in a way through imagination. Even still in the UK, it could only be through imagination in a sense, because I've been so used to feeling assured that I have family and friends that would support me at a certain point if anything was to go wrong. And I'm so used to that, and I take that for granted, that even conceiving of that not being there, and even just having the government in this country is, I have to use my imagination to do that. But the fact that there are places where there's kind of no bottom, actually, there's no net in existence. That is pretty terrifying, really, as a thought. And I think also part of that is a gratitude for, well, there's a museum in Manchester called the People's History Museum, which is, I recommend anyone go to it if you're around Manchester. It's a history of working class and social movements, including from the suffragettes and all sorts of social movements, miners' strikes and stuff. And I think going there, I've been there previously, and just being surrounded by these symbols of social struggles and all the effort that people have put in to make sure those nets actually exist at all. I was thinking about how, say, something like the minimum wage, people will have worked so hard for that to exist at all. That we say that's a given, or I assume it's a given, but that's not a given at all. Like there's, in some parts of the world, that's a ridiculous concept, and throughout history it would have been silly. And there's people today, Westerners and companies, who just see it as a hindrance to like the free market, and just basically it kind of gets in the way, really. And that's why, you take your business elsewhere, you go and get things made elsewhere. And anyway, going to the People's History Museum and being surrounded by these symbols of these struggles, it really was like, oh wow, like it's not, I assume so many things are just natural almost. I take them for granted to the level where I just believe, oh yeah, this is just society. This is what society looks like. We have certain things, and it's like, not at all. That's really not the case.
No. That makes me think of, actually, and it's strange to be someone saying this, but I think there is a lot of truth in this saying that's said in America, which is that freedom isn't free. And there can be a lot of baggage of what you think that means, but if you just take America out of it and don't think about any of that, just the idea that freedom and all these things, they don't just automatically happen. Like there are so many things that we take for granted that people have literally died for some of the rights and or worked their entire lives for some of the things that we benefit from. And I think it's so easy to just, as you're born, just feel like, oh yeah, this is the default of like, this is how things are. You've got some support from family, you've got some support from the government, you've got a possibility to improve things if you work hard. It's very unlikely that someone's just going to beat you up and take all of your stuff. But that's something that we really take for granted. But there's a lot of times where, like, you know, if someone wants something you have, they could literally just take it. There's so much infrastructure and things that have been built up that make our lives so much easier. And it's very easy to take for granted.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a very cool, trendy thing to say, but it really is true.
Yeah. So what we talked about so far, I guess, in relation to quote is what is easier to see is often overlooked. We've kind of talked in terms of society, what we actually take for granted and what we just assume. And it's so normal that it's completely overlooked, even though it's very easy to see. Not very much reflection actually gets you to the point of like, oh, well, yeah, like if someone breaks into my house, I have someone that I can call to try and sort that out.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not a given. The police existing or whatever, that's through a lot of work and taxes, et cetera, that actually exists at all. So yeah, I think that's really interesting to think of it on a kind of social in terms of society and what we actually take for granted. I mean, one of the first things that I thought of in relation to this is, well, it's one of the aspects of spiritual insight as well, is something like, and this is slightly funny for me to talk about now because it's not, I would relate this to what's called like self-inquiry or spiritual inquiry, which I haven't been doing very much over the last couple of years. But one thing that is possible to do is to reflect on who you are in the deepest sense. And we've done it a bit on this podcast. And part of that is inquiring into what is really here. So what is your direct experience and who is having that experience? And I won't guide us through that now, but often the conclusion or the kind of aha moment of that is it can often be accompanied by laughter, because it's such an all pervasive, ever present experience of, oh, this awareness, this pure experience or pure consciousness, of course, it's always been there. You know, this it's always there. It's not something I gain. I don't gain awareness. It's something that is recognized. Oh, like this is, yeah, it's recognized. This is always here. And it's so simple. And yet I've been striving and trying to gain some sort of special experience when actually all it takes is kind of swiveling the basically awareness becoming aware of itself. And if this doesn't make any sense, then apologies. But it's an interesting one that often with spiritual insight is that thing of like, oh, this is always here. This isn't new. This is me recognizing something that's ever present. It's just, you know, the classic, like, you can't see the wood for the trees. You know, it's so simple and so obvious that you just don't. I mean, it's the most obvious thing. You are alive. You are aware. That's been there your whole life. And it's the key to kind of a well of openness and love and all of these things. That's the key to it, is recognizing this pure awareness. And we'll travel halfway across the world to spend years in monasteries to be a spiritual seeker our entire life to have that recognition. So yeah, that was the thing that came up. There was one story that kind of goes with that, is this beggar is always sitting on this crate, and he's sitting on this crate for his entire life begging for money. And someone approaches him and says, what is in the crate? What, like, have you ever looked inside? It's just like, it's nothing. You know, I've always sat on it. It's nothing. There's nothing in there, and is encouraged to look inside. And, you know, it's a chest of gold. And it's this thing of like this richness within us is so ever present that we just don't even clock that it's there at all.
Have you read the Alchemist?
Yeah, I think so. Well, I don't know.
there's a great audiobook of it, and it's, you know, it's related to this. I'm not going to say exactly what happens, but it's just such a beautiful story that really perfectly illustrates this point. You know, the book is an allegory for this thing that we're talking about now. So it's super simple, but it's so universal, and it just resonated so much with me. It's a beautiful story. So yeah, I would definitely recommend that. With this quote, actually, one of the things I was thinking how we take things for granted, and the things that are good in our life just become the baseline of what's accepted so quickly. So if you were to think about which things are good in your life and which things are not going how you want it, say you were to actually score it of like how good your life is going, the natural way that we do it unconsciously is to score kind of the good things as a 0, as like, yeah, that obviously, you know, I've got a roof over my head, I've got access to my computer, I've got a microphone to record the podcast, and just see that as like a neutral base, as like, that's, you know, those are all zeros of things that just are. And then any things that I don't have, say a higher quality webcam, or your internet not being as fast as would be ideal, all of those things end up being minuses. So if you add up all those zeros of the good things and then all the minuses, you end up, you know, being like, well, you know, I've got all these things that are going good, but, you know, that's just the baseline. But then I've got all these things that are going bad. Rather than thinking, okay, here's a few issues in my life, you know, as you're listening to this, there's probably like a few fairly major things that you might be thinking are wrong in your life, or things that you need to do, things that you wish you could do, things that you wish you hadn't done, you know, a few of these major things. And then, you know, probably a few little bits and bobs that you need to just get sorted, and things that aren't quite where they should be. But I think if you actually add up all of those things that you're not happy with about your life, and all of the positive things that you're very lucky to have, you might be surprised to find how much bigger the list is in the good column. And it's just a bias that humans have to focus on the negatives, because your brain was not evolved to make you happy. You know, it's evolved to keep you safe and avoid threats. So there's not a part of you that's going like, oh, let's just appreciate this and smell the roses. You know, often that's something that you need to consciously make yourself do. And that can be something that's a practice, rather than it just having these random, very rare moments of appreciation, because it's so easy to just focus on the problems in your life, because that's kind of how our brains are wired, just to see what's going wrong. You know, everything that's good, that's fine. Don't need to worry about that. Don't need to think about all the things that are good. Just focus on the bad things, because those are the things that I need to sort out. And it can just really skew you and not make you realize that your life is a lot better than you realize it is.
Yeah, it is amazing how I think, because, well, the truth of that, everything arises on the basis of conditions. Essentially, the way things are right now is totally on this. I imagine it almost like a House of Cards has a bit of a a bad connotation, I get, but this kind of, you know, like, I think they were called connects or something. They were like these little plastic sticks, and then you'd have joints to them. It was like an equivalent to Lego, but like looked a bit more like, turn out a bit more like a kind of web. And all these conditions are like these connects that are built up to this exact point. The things to be grateful for and to reflect on are infinite. It's amazing. Like, if you know, I do it sometimes with food. you know, like I'll be eating food, and then I'm just thinking like the amount of people that have been involved in the process for me to actually eat this is unbelievable. You know, like the amount of steps that actually takes. And then you can start thinking about, you know, the fact that it actually rained at correct times in the places that this was grown, and, you know, you get the world involved. There's an infinite, because everything arises on these infinite conditions. There's an infinite amount of things to be grateful for. And it's quite amazing actually reflecting on that. And as you say, it's sort of it's just the standard to focus on the negative, really, I think. And then in that same vein, it's also the standard to be a bit frustrated at yourself for always focusing on the negative. I think that can be another, you know, like you feel negative about yourself, always focusing on the negative. Like it's just this kind of never ending thing.
It's
really
very easy to get pulled back into that cycle and not realize that, you know, that this fits into it of not seeing the thing that's most obvious. Is you can start browbeating yourself about the fact that you browbeat yourself too much.
Yeah. And
already you've already slipped back into the illusion, and you're not seeing what's right in front of you, that you're doing exactly the thing that you're getting annoyed at yourself for doing in that same moment.
Yeah, no, and there's so many opportunities to notice this happening. I mean, I had it today where during the kind of end of the work day, I work like a 9 to 5 on the computer 4 days a week. And the last couple of hours, I was just like so like bitter. Just sitting there like slumped, like kept on going on my phone, like, oh God, this is just not what I want to be doing at all. And it's like, yeah, I applied for the job that I got and I was ecstatic about getting it. You know, it's a graphic design job, like it's steady income over COVID. There are so many things that are going right in my life. And yet here I am, like just getting pissed off about looking at a screen. And it's like, it's a choice. There's a choice in there too. You know, it's like, even though I feel like it's always an uphill struggle because of that tendency to focus on the negative. There's always going to be a bias towards the negative to some degree, unless maybe you're enlightened or you've spent your entire, you know, life retraining yourself, which some people do. But there is a choice involved too. You know, if I'm sitting there feeling all like sorry for myself, you know, there is an effort going on there too. You know, like I'm really deliberately, you know, I know myself well enough to know what isn't going to help, and I'm still doing those things. So yeah, that's kind of besides the point a little bit, but it's just interesting, like how, I mean, literally every moment, including this, as you said, with my internet not working all that well, there are choices to be made in terms of what we take for granted and what we highlight. Those obviously.
No way, your internet just froze for me just as you said that. Wow,
that's ironic.
Well, I'm grateful that it's only happened that little bit.
Yeah, because we have recorded where it's basically just not worked for the first 15-20 minutes or whatever. Yeah. So another thing that I thought of in relation to this, well, it's around suffering and how essentially what Buddhism teaches or says is the case is that unless we're enlightened, we are suffering almost all of the time. There's an underlying like dissatisfaction or suffering that's going on, and the more you explore in meditation, then the subtler that level of suffering becomes. And I really clock that all pervasive kind of overlooked suffering. I notice that most when it does cease for a short period. So if I feel really, really content, which happens rarely, but it does happen, that's the moment when I realize my normal state is of suffering. There is a very subtle little alarm bell that runs through my whole life, and now that isn't there. And it is like it isn't like an alarm, like a car alarm or some sort of alarm, where if it goes on long enough, you just sort of, you take it on, and it's only when it stops that you're like, oh my God, it's so quiet. It's so quiet now. You know, I've got so used to this underlying kind of like tension that when it's not there, then that's profoundly different.
Yeah.
And I think it is interesting to notice that underlying worry or anxiety that is there for probably the majority of people, really.
Yeah. I'm excited to hear what quote you've chosen for this week. Thanks for watching as well, guys. Like if you want to help spread the podcast, and this is, if you enjoy these sorts of conversations, then that would just be amazing if you guys could spread it around and share it with people that you think will enjoy it. And if you want to buy either of us or both of us a coffee, then there's a link to do that down in the description. So what's the quote for next week?
Now that I think of it, this is potentially a bit controversial, but I think it's a perfect one to discuss. There are many translations of this particular saying of the Buddha, and it's from the 𝗢𝗲𝗿, which is an extremely old Buddhist text. Hatred can never cease through hatred in this world. Through love alone they cease. This is an eternal law. Thank you so much for listening. And if you have any thoughts about this ancient and controversial quote, you can get in touch through the Know What I Mean Instagram, which is 𝗚𝗲𝗿_podcast. And we have the email in the description of this episode. So much love, and we'll see you next week.
Peace.